Hello, my name is Rob Nagley. As some of my cousins graduated from high school and went off to college, I felt the desire to give them advice on how to keep their Christian faith during this transition and throughout their education and beyond. I eventually decided on the podcast format as it does not require the purchase of any book, is a less formal format, can be played at 2 times speed, and can be consumed while working out or doing other tasks. The following content I collected throughout college and medical school as I continue to grow in my faith and meet ideas, obstacles, and people who challenge it. I wish that I knew this information prior to going to college and hope that it will help you in your faith. I realize that I do not have a degree in theology or philosophy. However, I, like many who are listening, was a high school graduate, went off to a university, and had my faith challenged throughout the education process. I have tried to collect and condense general concepts from some of my favorite authors that apply to faith, reason, doubt, and everything in between, which have shaped and strengthened my faith. From 1970 to 1990, less than 10% of Americans identified as having no religious affiliation. This group has been coined the term the nuns, and I will be referring to them as such. Fast forward to now, in America, 25% of people identify as having no religious affiliation, and 40% of the nuns are youth. As you can see, the nuns have more than doubled in the last 30 years. A survey was conducted where people who are leaving the Catholic Church were asked what their primary reasons were for doing so. I have found research showing that people are leaving both the Catholic and Protestant faith, but this specific survey addressed those who were leaving the Catholic faith, and I was unable to find a similar article providing reasons that people were leaving their Protestant faith at comparable rates. After talking to some Protestant friends, I believe the following reasons apply to Christianity across all denominations. This was demonstrated as Hillsong's lead singer, Marty Sampson, recently left his Christian faith in an emotional Instagram post, citing the problem of evil. The top 4 reasons people are leaving their faith are as follows. 1. They just no longer believe in God, citing that faith is out of step with science. 2. Relativism, which is the idea that morality, truth, and knowledge are not absolute and just exist in relation to culture, perspective, and historical context. 3. Culture of self-intervention. Christianity tells people that they were made in the image of God and for a specific purpose. Secular culture says that it is up to you to define who you are and what you believe. Thus, Christianity feels too restrictive for non-religious people. We will discuss this further when I talk about the ego drama versus the theodrama. 4. The problem of evil, which questions how there could be evil in the world, such as hurricanes, suffering, pandemics, and disease, if there is a just and loving God. I hope to demonstrate how faith is not out of step with science and help you to keep and grow in your faith as you leave high school. I realize the intellectual arguments which are to follow may seem fussy and more difficult to grasp than other aspects of our faith, but if we see the main reason people are leaving their faith, in their own words, is due to intellectual challenges, then these intellectual challenges must be addressed. One theory as to why there is an increasing proportion of our country becoming part of the nuns is the watering down and oversimplification of religious education in order to become more accessible and fun. Note how people did not cite that Christianity was too difficult for them to grasp intellectually as a reason for their leaving of the faith. While attending Kansas State University, legitimate and challenging questions about God were raised by those in opposition to Christianity, and I did not think back and say, man, I am so glad I can rely on all the knowledge I obtained at the fun pizza and Mountain Dew parties that were part of my religious formation. Rather, I wish that I had more advanced religious education and decided that maybe I should go out and find it on my own. At school, we are challenged academically with difficult concepts in physics, calculus, and chemistry. Why then should we shy away from being taught the beautiful and complex postulates of theology, which is the study of God? And if we are not challenged in our religious formation by others, we must seek out this truth on our own. The disservice of being taught to think about our religious beliefs only in a superficial way occurs when we get to college and experience individuals who will present arguments that make us question our faith. For if I ever am to drop an original quote of my own, here it is. A third-grade understanding of God will not fit into an undergraduate or graduate understanding of the world. Far too many people head off to college without strengthening their faith prior to or during college, encounter questions about their faith, and abandon it. We have all heard of the argument of faith versus science, but the argument should be faith versus scientism, not faith versus science. Scientism is a philosophy that the only things that are true are able to be verified by the scientific method. However, this philosophy is incomplete and cannot account for love, friendship, or why a sunset is beautiful. Even the scientific method is unable to verify itself using the scientific method. Scientism is the ideological view that reduces all of knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. However, as we see, the following questions cannot be answered by the scientific method. So an individual who truly conforms to scientism would see the following questions as either irrelevant or that love, moral truth, and beauty do not even exist. Why is a moral act good or bad? Why is a particular work of art, landscape, or musical piece beautiful? Why is a particular political arrangement just or unjust? Why is there something rather than nothing? How do we explain love? These are all philosophical questions that are not at odds with science. They are just questions which science cannot answer. What religion explains and what science explains are two different questions. Thus, no matter how much we learn about science, we will never lack a need for religion. Theoretical particle physics is the study of the fundamental constituents of matter, the fundamental forces which interact on this matter, and what fundamental laws govern the forces and matter. Theoretical particle physicist Dr. Stephen Barr discusses how, for him, the difficulties of his faith don't necessarily come from science. Rather, it is philosophical and historical matters that challenge his faith. I found this to be true during college as well. It is a common misconception that most scientists who are also atheists at one point came into science believing in God and then gained newfound knowledge of science or made a discovery of something in research leading them to no longer believe in God. While it is typical for many academic scientists to not believe in God, there are many who practice science and also have faith. And many of those who are atheists had this belief before starting their academic career. You can see in other professions, such as journalism, that an overwhelming majority of journalists are not religious. This is not because journalists are more intelligent or have discovered something in their profession that enlightened them to an atheistic worldview. Different occupations draw different personality types. People who go into science often learn the myth that historically science and religion have been at war, with religious institutions suppressing science. They use the Galileo affair as exemplifying the relationship of modern science and religion over the last 400 years. In reality, this was an atypical event. Almost all of the great scientists in the first 250 years were religious themselves. People have been primed to believe the misconception that religion and science are irreconcilable. You can't pick an outlier and base an understanding of something off of that. An example would be that in some car crashes, people have been saved by not wearing their seatbelt. However, if you analyze the data over years of car accidents, it is easy to see that one has a better chance of surviving the accident if they wear a seatbelt. It would be wrong for someone to say, yeah, I knew one guy who didn't wear his seatbelt and survived a crash, and use this as the basis to not wear a seatbelt while driving. Similarly, here, we cannot ignore the fact that the overwhelming majority of the founders of modern science were also religious, and just focus on what happened to Galileo in 1633. For those who are not aware, the Catholic Church made Galileo recant his theory that the earth moved around the sun. Somehow, our professors never seem to forget this incident, but conveniently gloss over the fact that Isaac Newton, Blaise Pascal, and the founder of the scientific method, Francis Bacon, were all devoutly religious men and of Christian faith. We should not feel that we have to pick between science and faith. Science is a way to discover the omnipotence of the Almighty and beauty of God's design and should be revered as such. Many assume that religion is just some superstitious thing that we had before we started learning more about the physical world, or that religion was just something we believed in before we could explain things better through physical science. However, I do not think this fallacy plays out in the minds of the faithful. During medical school, there is a lot of material to cover on any given exam. On my neurology rotation, we had a lecture over the physiology of sight and anatomy of the eye. With limited time available and unlimited material to study before the exam, I decided to skip some of the intricacies of eyeball anatomy and focus on more high-yield material. Thus, I am unable to formulate a complete picture in my mind of all the anatomic aspects of the eye at this moment. Here I will point out how the previous logical point is inadequate. The reason I believe in a Trinitarian God is not because I am unable to fully understand how the eyeball works. I also do not hold my faith simply as a substitute for my lack of knowledge of multiple aspects of quantum physics. My lack of knowledge in these specific physical scientific realms is not what contributes to me believing in God. My wife had a coworker proudly tell her once that she does not believe in God, rather she believes in science. This person also graduated with a degree which required Intro to Geology or its equivalent as its only scientific course. I never took geology, but I would be shocked if understanding something about rocks could steer someone away from God. Rather, I believe she, like many of our age, was brought into the myth that one cannot both believe in God and believe in the truths of science. There is a myth that is continually propagated by modern society that science and religion stand athwart to each other and that the physical sciences emerged only after a long, arduous struggle against the oppressive and superstitious religion. Galileo has become the patron saint of critical reasoning, persecuted by the intolerant religion. While mistakes have been made on both sides, science and authentic faith should never be considered enemies. Rather, the contrary. The intellectual matrix necessary for the birth of experimental modern science was established by the Christian faith. Bishop Robert Barron lays out the two theological and fundamental assumptions which were requisite for the development of the scientific process. Intellectuals had to see the world as non-divine and intelligible. In the following philosophies, pantheism, natural mysticism, and animism, the world is considered sacred, making it an object of worship and not of analysis or experimentation. A quick and simple analogy I can draw here is that certain Eastern religions believe the cow to be sacred and thus do not eat beef. For someone to practice science, they must presume that there is some intelligibility behind it. In my high school physics class, we had Mr. Cole's famous egg drop experiment. This required us to create a container out of glue and toothpicks, which will protect the egg as it falls from a two-story drop onto the tile floor below. The goal was for us to apply the equation pressure equals force divided by area in a real-life situation and build a container to have a large area in which it will contact the ground, thereby dissipating the force and reducing the pressure placed upon the egg to prevent the eggshell from being penetrated. If there are no fundamental laws of physics that apply to the egg drop experiment, then it shouldn't matter how you build the container to dissipate pressure that occurs when the egg hits the floor. To put forth the effort to build the container for the egg, we have to assume that the laws of physics, pressure equals force divided by area, are true and will apply to our experiment. In the study of psychology, we assume that the psyche has an intelligible form. At times it seems that our modern society forgets that a scientist does not create the universal intelligibility, rather, he or she intuits that it exists prior to his or her scientific project, essentially meaning that